Chase Young, we know he had his fifth-year option denied by the Washington Commanders. Defensive Rookie of the Year when he was drafted. I think he was the number 2 overall pick. Best pass rusher in the draft. Some people said he was the best player in the draft. And Chase Young still has a lot in the tank, but the injuries, some of the nagging, injuries that have, happened with him, with the Commanders, they didn't like what they saw. Maybe the team's moving in a different direction. And this is a defensive powerhouse team. This is a Washington Commanders team that really has been good, if not great, in the NFL in terms of defense. So for them to not pick up the fifth-year option on the defensive Rookie of the Year in that class. Like I said, some thought he was the best player. He was easily the best pass rusher in the class and, coming in and everything. Yes, brother, let's absolutely set it up. I would love to have you, man. Hope you have a great night. All right, Chase Young is on the market. So let's talk about Chase Young destinations. I'm not going to talk about trade packages, but just destinations. First team off the top here, the Detroit Lions. We know they take Aiden Hutchinson. I had been saying in the NFL draft, they should have taken more defensive line because even with taking Aiden Hutchinson, who was, I think, a number 2 overall pick in that draft, just like Chase Young was in his respective year, they still weren't able to stop the run. They had the worst defense in the league last year. They were dead last in the NFL, I want to say, in defensive rush yards per game. So you bring Chase Young in. I understand he's coming off of the injuries. I understand the production hasn't been great, but you have Dan Campbell, who seems to be, decent with younger players, molding players. He's a player's coach, great energy. That's what Chase Young would need. He'd be in a new city. He would still be in the NFC, but he'd go to a different division, have the chance to chase after Kirk Cousins, Jordan Love, and Justin Fields. I mean, there you go. You'd have a decent selection, I'd say. I mean, quarterbacks love to get after, or pass rushers love to get after whatever quarterbacks they can, but it'll be a good fit for Chase Young. Going to go with the Saints as well because they only really have Cam Jordan, Brian Bresee. I know they're looking to bring in more defensive linemen. I know they're looking to bring in more defensive, really just defensive linemen in general, whether it's the interior, the edge rusher. But when you look at the Saints depth chart, they don't have a lot to work with as Caden Ellis does leave. Marcus Davenport did leave. They lose David Onyemata as well. And the Saints being able to land a young player in Chase Young would almost feel like a replacement for Cam Jordan. I'm not saying he has Cam Jordan-like characteristics, but the chance to be an elite pass rusher just like Cam Jordan has been, the chance to play great on the edge just like Cam Jordan has, the chance to really prove yourself in New Orleans, the chance to prove yourself with the Lions. You can either be that side, it's that counterpart or counterpiece to Aiden Hutchinson, or be the replacement essentially to Cameron Jordan in New Orleans. Think it'd be a great fit. Saints need it. They can make it happen. Minnesota Vikings. This is a team that's defense has not impressed me over the last few years. And, they lose Patrick Peterson. He goes to the Steelers. Was it Danielle Hunter, or is Danielle Hunter still there? Let me check. Is Danielle Hunter still? I feel like he went somewhere. No, he's still there. I think he was thinking about bailing. Let me see that Vikings depth chart, though. I want to make sure I'm accurate on my P's and Q's as I'm going through this segment. So you got Harrison Phillips, you got Danielle Hunter, Brian Asamoah, Marcus Davenport. Of course, you still have Harrison Smith as the safety, but you're really looking for some nice defensive presence, and it would be a nice compliment to Danielle Hunter or maybe a Brian Asamoah. Marcus Davenport coming over from the New Orleans Saints. I forget that the Saints even lose him as well, so they could really use Chase Young in that aspect. Or maybe I did say, no, I actually don't think I did say Marcus Davenport, but bringing in Chase Young, young player, would really benefit this defense for the Minnesota Vikings. They're a team that if they can bring in this type of pass rusher, no, it's not going to elevate them to the playoffs, but it could win them another game or two. It could become a critical play from Chase Young to make this a success. The Jacksonville Jaguars, being able to put Chase Young next to Josh Allen of the Jaguars. Josh Allen just recently said he didn't feel like he was good enough. The Jaguars, I think, were in the bottom 7 or 8 teams of the league, maybe even bottom 5 in terms of sacks, sacks given to the offense. So they were not great at sacking the quarterback last year. Bringing in Chase Young, Doug Peterson just clearly showed us how he can mend Trevor Lawrence after the horrible outing from Urban Meyer. He could do that for Chase Young as well, buy into him, just really believe in him, build that game plan for him, not even make him a rotational piece, but a guy who's going to be on that defensive line. The Jaguars, they're coming up. A lot of people think they're going to be great this year. I'm one of them, having them win in 12 games. Trevor Lawrence looking to be elite. Be a hell of a move. The Chicago Bears as well might not be an ideal one, But Chicago bringing in Tremaine Edmonds. They also bring in TJ Edwards. So they have a really nice linebacking core now. They do bring in some secondary help. And if you brought Chase Young in, we do know that they lose Khalil Mack. He goes to the Raiders now with the Chargers. Chase Young could be that real cornerstone pass rushing piece. Chase Young could be that young player that the Bears want to rally around, whether it's the fans, whether it's the defense. I mean, he could turn into an eventual captain for that team, because when you're taking a look at the depth chart, I mean, yes, you do have, like I said, TJ Edwards, Tremaine Edmonds, but outside of that, I mean, I like Jaquan Brisker, I like Eddie Jackson, I like Tyreek Stevenson. Those are all secondary guys. I would really enjoy to have Chase Young. Having Chase Young as a Chicago Bear, seeing Chase Young as a Chicago Bear, it would be huge. I mean, that would be a great defensive presence. Maybe bringing him in on a 1-year prove-it deal. Justin Fields looking to mesh with some people. Of course, that's different sides of the ball there. A lot of opportunity here. The Panthers as well. Yes, there's Brian Burns. Yes, there's other decent defensive players, but who else would really be able to commandeer this? It's so funny as I say commandeer, because that's where Chase Young is coming from. Who would really be that standout defensive player if Chase Young wasn't here? I mean, yes, there is a Shy Tuttle, there is Brian Burns, of course, Shaq Thompson, a lot of respectable people on that depth chart, but you put Chase Young in there, he's going to complement well. Henry Anderson, he could jump in for Henry Anderson. Derek Brown, Brian Burns, Shaq Thompson, Shy Tuttle, those are solid pieces. Brian Burns, more than likely that best pass rusher, but you bring in Chase Young, lot of opportunity, lot of chance to respark his career. And Carolina could be sneaky good next year. Carolina might not be good going into their bye week. I don't remember what I had the prediction as. Carolina might not be good early on. Carolina might not be good in the middle of the season, but towards the back part of the middle of the season and the entire back half, Carolina could really be a team that's just sneaky competitive. That, yes, they might only win 6 or 7 games, but if you watch all their games, they can be competitive. They have Bryce Young, they have Adam Thielen, they have Miles Sanders, they have DJ Chark, they have Hayden Hurst. They have why do I always get these guys mixed up? They have Frank Wright. Shane Steichen's with the Colts. Frank Wright used to be with the Colts. Y'all see me struggling here. I'm trying to line all these people up. They have Frank Wright to lead. So Chase Young being in there, Frank Wright, awesome coach, might be the head coach. Yeah, he is the head coach. Might not be dealing a lot with the defense, but Chase Young would be a great spot here. Or the Panthers would be a great spot for Chase Young. The Chargers. And this might not be one that's ideal to some people because they need help. We've seen the Derwin Jameses and the Bosas of recent years being hurt, and we know that that's been a thing with Chase Young as well. But bringing in again Chase Young next to a Bosa, they did just bring in Eric Kendricks, which was solid. I believe they did lose Drew Tranquill. That might have went to the Vikings. I do my best mentally to keep the mental notes of all the players hopping around, just all the research for the show. But this will be another solid spot here. I've got the Ravens too. We know that they lose Calais Campbell. They do have Odafe Owe, and they do have a couple of other pieces on that defense. But Chase Young, what you really get from Chase Young is I feel like you get a motor that won't necessarily give out. Yes, the injuries aren't ideal, but when he's at his peak, he can be the best in the league. He can be top 5. He can be top 3. Yes, we might not have necessarily seen that from Chase Young in recent years, but his rookie year was very promising, and there was a reason that he won Defensive Rookie of the Year. I mean, outside of, you got Roquan Smith, of course, you got Odafe Owe, Michael Pierce, Broderick Washington, Justin Matabuki. So you do have some players on that defensive roster that Chase Young can mesh with. I mean, you talk about some veterans out there. Roquan Smith could really mend him. Patrick Queen is a younger player in the league that can also kind of vibe with him as well. The New York Giants putting Chase Young potentially next to a guy like Dexter Lawrence, and knowing the season that the Giants just had, Coach of the Year in Brian Daboll, the big contract because of who it goes to, and Daniel Jones that they pay for. They've got Leonard Williams. They got a Kayvon Thibodeau, Bobby Okereke as well. So again, another defensive line that could use a Chase Young to be that best player, to be that star, to be that potential captain. And I know it might be pushback because he can't maybe be that as soon as he comes back from injury, but he has that potential. in him. And then the last team here is going to be the Seattle Seahawks. We know Pete Carroll loves him a good defensive player. He's a defensive player guy. He's a player's coach. I don't care what anyone says. Pete Carroll listens to his players. He might not have made the best things cook for Russell Wilson, but when you're talking about bringing him in, working with a Draymond Jones, working with a Jordan Brooks, of course, they bring in Bobby Wagner. Those are guys that you can supplement in the pass rushing game. But also, those guys that I just mentioned, drop them back into coverage as well. But we know the culture that's in Seattle. We know how Pete Carroll loves his defensive players. And anybody that's going to pick up Chase Young, I'll go ahead and say this, anyone that's going to pick up Chase Young, bring him in on a prove-it deal, because I believe he wants to have that prove-it deal now that the team that drafted him didn't even pick up his fifth-year option, and he was Defensive Rookie of the Year. So I think, when you look at what Chase Young is going to provide for a team, he could really be a steal. I mean, you're talking about a kid that could have double-digit sacks next year. And I don't think that's too much to say. But we see guys, top pass rushers in the league, 15 sacks, 16, 19 sacks. And Chase Young can hit that level within the next 2 years coming off of injury. So Commanders fans, how are you feeling about Chase Young being on the market? All the teams that I just mentioned here, Seahawks, Saints, Giants, this, that, and the third. Where would you like to see Chase Young go? Didn't talk about trade packages, but I did discuss destinations for I almost said Trey Young. Chase